In today's video, we're going to be talking a little bit about what domestic abuse actually is. One of the most important things we can do as a church community to combat domestic abuse and support victims is talk about it. But how can we talk about it without really knowing what exactly we're talking about? According to the UK's 2021 Domestic Abuse Act, domestic abuse can consist of physical or sexual abuse, violent or threatening behaviour, coercive or controlling behaviour, economic abuse, or psychological or emotional abuse. The Domestic Abuse Act also states that it does not matter whether this is one incident or a pattern of behaviour, it's all considered to be domestic abuse. There is also another form of abuse which is not mentioned in the Domestic Abuse Act, but it's really important to discuss when we're talking about abuse within church communities, and that is spiritual abuse. So let's talk a little bit more about these different forms of abuse and what they might look like. Most people are pretty familiar with what physical or sexual abuse might look like, but other forms of abuse can be harder to spot, and a lot of people don't know much about them. Women's Aid define coercive control as an act or pattern of acts of assault, threats, humiliation and intimidation which are used to harm, punish or frighten. So, controlling or coercive behaviour can look like isolation of the victim from family and friends, the victim being deprived of basic needs such as food or access to services like medical care, monitoring of activities, whether that be online activity or day-to-day activities. The perpetrator might control where the victim goes, who they see, what they wear, and it can also come in the form of humiliation or degradation. Economic and financial abuse occurs when the perpetrator uses finances and money to further control the victim. This could look like the perpetrator having total control of all finances in the household. Financial information may be kept secret from the victim. Sometimes debts are taken out in the victim's name. And it could also look like the victim having restricted or no access to work, or their spending being controlled and monitored by the perpetrator. Psychological or emotional abuse is the use of non-physical acts to manipulate and hurt a victim. This can look like screaming and shouting, mockery, insults. The abuser might sulk or give the victim silent treatment. There could be gaslighting, where the victim is led to believe that they are misremembering things or interpreting things wrong. There could be threats of destruction, violence, or even suicide. Or the victim may be told or led to believe that they deserve the abuse they are experiencing, or that they are not even being abused at all. Now let's talk about spiritual abuse. There is a huge lack of research on spiritual abuse, and it's a pretty hard form of abuse to define. But spiritual abuse is a form of psychological and emotional abuse. Research has identified that one of the key characteristics of spiritual abuse is the misuse of religious texts or scriptures in order to control, coerce, manipulate, or pressure the victim. Perpetrators may also use religion to justify their abusive behaviour. The misappropriation of theology which is used in spiritual abuse has been acknowledged in the Methodist Church's domestic abuse policy. The policy acknowledges that many survivors have spoken about how theology has been used against them to further victimise them in their abuse. Some aspects of theology which are often used against victims are submission, the idea that a husband should be the head or have headship over the wife. There can also sometimes be an overemphasis on marriage vows where the safety and well-being of a victim is placed below the importance of the longevity of the marriage and the keeping of the vows. It is important to remember that a survivor of domestic abuse who divorces their partner is not responsible for the breaking of the marriage covenant. Another aspect of theology which is often misused by abusers is the idea of self-sacrifice, suffering and guilt. Many victims and survivors are led to believe that they should bear the cross as Jesus did and deal with the suffering that they are experiencing. And the final aspect of theology noted in the Methodist Church's domestic abuse policy is repentance and forgiveness. It is important to remember that in the context of domestic abuse, a survivor's forgiveness does not mean that they should stay in an unsafe situation or a marriage or relationship that brings up trauma for them. Similarly, repentance from a perpetrator does not completely eradicate the chance of reoffending. So, now that we have a better understanding of what domestic abuse is, in the next videos we will be talking more about why and how we should be talking about domestic abuse, how you can spot the signs, and what to do and not do when someone in your church community needs help.